Hi, David Vizard here, and you guys are watching Powertec 10. Just as a reminder here, this is the channel where we try to eliminate BS, give you hardcore usable tech, and expose poor products. Good products, we promote the heck out of them. Anyway, on with this, that's episode 91 of Powertec 10. The subject, aerodynamics. When I first started racing back in, I think it'd be about 1960. Now I should say, when I started racing seriously, I did a few races that technically I shouldn't have been in because I wasn't old enough to drive. But the events tended not to be very, how shall I say, organized and up to speed and by the book. Anyway, the car I drove was about the draggiest car you can imagine. Not quite the draggiest, but close to it. And that was the British Leyland Mini. First races I did were in an 850 Mini. And because it had so little power, the 850 that is, aerodynamics was absolutely critical. The top speed of an original 850 Mini was 72 miles an hour. That's if you got a flat road and about 1.5 miles, 2 miles to get to speed. Drag coefficient, as I remember it, was about 0.6. Most modern cars are now in the mid threes, right? So we can see it's a lot better. But here's my point. How important is it with a more modern vehicle? I mean, if you're stuck with a Mini, what can you do? Just for those guys who have Minis, I've got a couple of things here that you might want to think about. If you put a whole bunch of louvers in the top of the, in America they're called fenders, in England we call them the wings, where the air can get out from underneath the fenders, wings, then A, the car will go faster, and B, the road holding gets better because it relieves the front end of about 75, 80 pounds at 100 miles an hour. It shows up at Silverstone as about 0.4 of a second a lap reduction on a lap time of around about 1 minute 10, right? So I'm talking about a Mini here, which is essentially a road going Mini. Anyway, I'm getting off the point here. What would it be worth to have aerodynamic aids on, say, a drag car? And that's mostly what I'm going to talk about. Many of you know that a few years back, David McCoig and I ran a Malibu, picture coming up, and we had very little cash to do it. I just moved and I was soaking up the expenses of a somewhat costly house moving deal, then having to get a workshop up to scratch. So, hey, not much left to go racing. So we had to get the best we could. And that involved not only building an engine that was cost effective, but also making sure that we didn't squander any horsepower that we didn't have to. So let's take a look at what we can do. The materials I'm going to use for this will be a spirit level, some stiff corrugated cardboard, some good duct tape. That is duct tape. It's not duct tape. I thought, why would people call it duct tape? D-U-C-K. What's it got to do with ducts? Then eventually I figured out it's duct tape. Suddenly made sense. Anyway, off the subject here. A Malibu is not exactly a very streamlined car. Aerodynamics on it are I think they're about 0.53, so they're more or less old school. So we had to look at ways of utilizing the limited horsepower we had from our motor, which is also a budget deal, and I showed roughly what the build was. It'll appear up in the corner here. In episode whatever it was, that will appear up in the corner. And now it was up to us to make sure we used that power to get the car to the finish line, not to disturb the air. In 1980, I treated myself to a new California spec Pontiac Trans Am. Beautiful looking car, but the performance was total rubbish. My first endeavors were to see if I could get some cheap speed out. I mean, it was a mid 16 second car, maybe mid to upper 16. Not very quick at all. I think 60 came up in something like 10 and a half, 11 seconds. Not my style at all. But anyway, this was the Chevrolet powered version, and I was already building an engine for it. So between times, I thought I would see if I could get any more out of what was here. Well, the first thing is I made the Trans Am shaker hood into a functional one. Now I didn't point it forward, I pointed it backwards. Right, pointing it forward would have upset the carburation, but that proved to be quite a good move there. However, I very quickly came to a stop. Now I got to talk with one of the engineers at GM who was responsible for the aerodynamics, and he said to me, in the wind tunnel, the Trans Am was much more slippery than it when it had a 1 degree down sloping angle towards the front as measured from the door rocker panel. Now, one of the things they screwed up with the Trans Am was they found that the design of the bodywork was too low to clear the majority of curbs when parking. So what they did was they raised the front of the car by about an inch. So when you checked it along the rocker panel, it was about 1 degree sloping towards the back. Well, there's nothing worse than getting air underneath a car, unless it's off the start line and you've got an excess of power and you just can't help that car coming up. But anyway, other than that, you don't want air to go underneath the car. It just adds a huge amount of drag and detracts from the handling of the car, especially when you get up to speed. So I dutifully went back to the shop and lowered the car by, I think I cut the springs on it and then did a bit of juggling, and I got a 1 degree angle as measured on the door rocker panel. What a difference that made. The car now had a positive down sloping front on it, and in the quarter mile it went just over 2.5 tenths quicker and almost 2 miles an hour faster. Almost as good as getting cold air to the intake. It turns out that 1 degree is relatively universal. You need to get the front of your car down about 1 to at most about 1.5 degrees at the front. And we're talking about cars now which have something resembling an aerodynamic body, right? It's not going to make any difference to your T-bucket or something like that. But anyway, we applied that to the Malibu, and sure enough, it worked. I can't remember the exact reduction now, but we were racing on the 8th mile, and this was early stages when we had one of our earlier motors in, and I think we dropped something like about 1.5 tenths out of our ET. Well, I think the lesson to be learned here is to make sure that we're not driving down the drag strip with a car that's nose high. Now, I'm going to continue this theme, so let's move on to the next mod we can do. Our next move was to put an air dam on the front of our Malibu. Now, the intent of an air dam is to stop air going under the car. At first sight, it looks like an air dam is nothing but more frontal area, and therefore, if we use just simple logic here, more aerodynamic drag. But that proves not to be the case. Now, the first air dam we made for this was out of sheets of stiff corrugated cardboard. What we did here was to make the, how shall I say, the beginnings of our air dam, that is the basic shape and size, out of one thickness of corrugated cardboard, with the corrugations going vertically. This gave us the opportunity to go round the corners okay. I think we did one half and then the other half. Then, after we glued all that down with Gorilla tape, Gorilla Duct tape that is, we made another two to go on top of that to get the stiffness. Now, this took about half a roll of Gorilla tape and some fairly extensive sizes of cardboard. If this air dam worked, the plan was to make one out of aluminum and bend it to shape and tape it up as per the cardboard one. Well, folks, it did work. We noticed a small drop in ET on the 8th. I'm just trying to think. It was about a little over half a tenth. Now, the reason we could get consistent on this was that we tried the air dam and then took it off and did a run when we were going to make the aluminum one. And sure enough, all the runs after that we made, and this was on a test and tune day, so we made the runs very quickly, one to another, about, I'd say no more than 15 minutes apart. Then we made the aluminum one, so that did that. Next on the list was to look at how the air went through the radiator grill. Now, the front end of the Malibu suffers from too many surface areas being deep in the bodywork, i.e. essentially it's a concave shape and it resembles a very poor parachute. The areas concerned include the radiator grille and the lights. So we taped up the headlights, as you can see in the nearby photo, and the grille. We blocked all of this off, and making sure we had enough cooling, the electric fan on the car was capable of keeping the engine totally cool whilst it was idling, with no air coming through the front of the car. It was all coming up from the ground through the radiator and then out. Out meaning it could have been going underneath the car, out through the hood vent, etc. Now, what we've got now is a front end which is virtually slightly akin to a flat plate, which is better than being slightly akin to a poor parachute. How did that work out? Well, surprisingly enough, the sealing off the radiator and making moves like that was definitely worthwhile. We went back and forth on this first with a piece of clear plastic over the radiator grille so it didn't look like we'd done anything. Then eventually we just taped over the whole lot and nobody seemed to mind about that. It wasn't against the rules, but that doesn't matter. Somebody's going to complain if you go faster. Right. So that was the next thing we did. Now we started investigating the cowl induction that we had. Too many people seem to think these must work because it's a well-known fact there's a high pressure zone in front of the windshield. It doesn't quite work like that, as we will see in the next chapter coming up. Successfully employing cowl induction at first appears to be a slam dunk deal. That's not the case. I did some temperature measurements, and with a regular, non-well thought out system, i.e. just about every one you see, the air going past the end of the open end of the cowl is going fast enough when we reach any significant speeds, and that is above about 50 or 60 miles an hour, for the velocity of the air, or the momentum of the air going up the windshield, has enough to draw air out of the cowl induction, in spite of the fact that the engine is trying to draw it in. Now what this means is, as indicated by my temperature measurements, is that the engine is drawing air from within the engine compartment that has come up past the engine and picked up all that heat. So this is what I found with cowl induction is, once you get to about 50 or 60 miles an hour, which on a drag strip is like just still in the first few feet, your engine is breathing hot air. We don't want that. Now, this meant that I had to make some changes to things to get it to work properly. Look at the following diagram here, and you will see how the air goes up the windshield, and at speeds over 60, 70 miles an hour, the air that gets drawn in, which is precious little, is going halfway up the windshield before it turns around and comes down. Sometimes when you get to speeds over 100 miles an hour, it doesn't even turn around and come down the windshield. It tries to go around the corners, or it gets sucked out from within the engine compartment. I want you to take careful note of the wool strands taped to the hood of our car. You will see, if you look very carefully, that as we get towards the end of the strip, the air is mostly coming out of the cowl induction system rather than going in. So we've got to do something about that. Initially, that is during the burnout and the first few feet going down the track, you can see that the strands of wool show that the air is going in the hood scoop, the cowl induction hood scoop. However, we don't need to go very far, I mean past the first 60 feet, and air is coming out. That means that engine is breathing hot air that's from within the engine compartment. Now watch carefully here. This is just one of several tests we did. It didn't matter where we put the cotton strands, either on the base of the cowl induction system or on the top, sides, wherever. Once the car got over about 50 or 60 miles an hour, air came out of that cowl induction. So what can we do about it? Let's revisit the side view of the car showing the cowl induction. Here it is, plain and simple. Now then, let's move on to the way the air moved when the car was getting up any kind of speed, as we see in this second showing here. What can we do to avoid that? Well, we weren't allowed to ram the air into the engine via a hood scoop, which is not really a good idea. Very few hood scoops work, by the way. The pro stock ones do, they spend time in wind tunnels and all that good stuff, but hood scoops are not generally well designed. You have to be looking at Formula One to get to something that's of premier importance there. But anyway, let's see what can be done to stop the air going up the windshield so far, or even continuing up the windshield without turning around, which at speeds above maybe 60 or 70 miles an hour, as I've said, it doesn't turn around. The simple answer, an air dam. That's what we did. We made up a cardboard air dam, a good stiff one, stuck to the windshield with good old Gorilla duct tape. Now it didn't go right across the windshield. It it spanned the area immediately behind the cowl induction all the way to around about a foot either side. Has to be pretty strong, and you'll need to put some gussets behind the back of it to stop it folding up. But how well did it work? Champion. And I'll tell you another tale about that. Essentially, we dropped enough time that on the after tests, we were typically 13 to 15 feet further down the strip in any given time. So that's how much of an extra lead we would have had over opposition. Now I want you to watch this video very carefully and see that we didn't use the air dam because it was protested. I wasn't there, but it was protested, and I would have made sure that protest was squashed because it was totally legal. But David was there by himself. He wasn't the rule master. I was. Anyway, you'll see that we lost to Fast Eddie by about the amount the air dam was worth. Now then, I want you to think about this. Fast Eddie, he is a very capable racer. He is not your average Joe Blow. He builds beautiful race cars, and he knows what he's doing. And this is the other thing, he has the budget to do it. Now, I'm not decrying his efforts because he's got money to do it. No, I'm saying what he does is he just uses that checkbook only when it allows him to buy something that he can further rework to get the job done better. Our little old Malibu was a cheap junkyard special, and yet with the aid of bits of cardboard and duct tape and doing this, that and the other and thinking about what we were doing, we built a car that was totally competitive against a multiple champion and record setter. By the way, Eddie, love your new cars. They are gorgeous. Now, let me sum up here. Aerodynamics are well worthwhile. All told, we saved around about 2.5, maybe close to 0.3 of a second on the 8th mile with bits of cardboard, scissors, duct tape, and a spirit level. Can't get much cheaper than that. Thank you for watching.